few things, and I will finish off with how I bumped into Zaha Hadid in 2000 in London. First of all, the name of the lecture is Endless City. Now, most of us know the definition of a city, but what is the definition of endless? So I actually looked it up. Endless is no end or limit. Endless is countless or innumerable. But endless is also having the ends joined to form a loop allowing continuous action. Now let's see in what category of endless you fall in. Subharthi Guha is a alumni of the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi, 2006. 2008, he set up his own design group, conceptSG. And I also read that he did in 15 countries, 30 projects. Whether that means you did 2 projects in every country or not, we will see. The most important thing is that for us it's a pleasure with urban design that you're actually working with our students and working with our faculty. I think lectures are very important, but to work together, that's where the cooking, the making of urban design, the thinking process really happens. Now, the short story of London 2000 at the AA. Some of you must know the AA building. It's a series of little buildings with lots of nooks and corners. And at a certain moment, I went for a lecture actually, and then I literally bumped into a fairly large woman, and she looked at me and she said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I know you are Zaha Hadid. Let me introduce myself." So that question of those flaming Iraqi eyes, "Who are you?" was my first interaction with Zaha. Anyway, I'm sure you will share some stories tonight, and I would like to give an applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me at the back? Sorry. Since you said, "Who are you?" I think it's a question not just to me, not to you, but to myself and everyone else who's sitting around here. Because soon you'll graduate and you're going to move out and you're going to probably work with a Zaha Hadid or another architect. And the question will still keep coming at you, who are you? Because, you know, the projects have tags, the projects have names. And when he says I've done 30 projects in 15 countries, very few of them I have my own tag in. Mostly it's for someone else. And so what I'll do in this presentation is I'm going to run through a few of those projects because it's hard to escape tags. And then I'll come to the main topic, which is Endless Cities, which is my own research that's been presented all around India and abroad and America on how we should design cities in a very different way than we have done so far. So without further ahead, so this is, who are you? That's what I was wondering. This is one of the projects I did when I was working with Charles Correa in Bombay, and only recently I got a chance to visit this project in Lisbon. I hadn't seen it finished, and it still wasn't my project, but it was a beautiful building, quite proud. It was a Cancer and Heart Research Institute in Lisbon, if you ever go. This is what it looks like. It has an auditorium on one side, and the other end is the heart of highest ends of cancer research. This was another project I did with him in his office in Toronto, the Smiley Center, that finished recently, until I moved to London to do my master's, and then finally joined Zaha Hadid to do projects something like this, which most of you know some of these projects, but I'll still name them. There's the Glasgow Car Museum. That's the interior of the Ganzhou Opera House that finished in 2011. This is Evelyn and Grace Academy that got us a Sterling Prize, and this is in the heart of London. It's in Brixton, which used to be a very dodgy area if you have ever been there before. but now it's getting better. And this is the Sheikh Zayed Bridge. A project like this took about 12 years to complete. So you see, I was just a small part of it. There were so many other people in the studio involved in it. This is in Austria. This is one of the first projects of our office at the Art Museum. This is one of my very interesting projects, and this is the BMW factory in Leipzig. And why it's interesting is the interior. It was built in the late 90s and finished in 2002. But you see the top, the cars are running up, and the offices are below. So it was one of these attempts to mix the post-war Germany between the blue-collar and the white-collar workers, the attempt of the design. So it still runs successfully, and it's quite nice. You can see how the cars are built and everything, and they take you a tour. This is the Maxi Museum, Rome, most of you are aware of. Projects like these, they get a lot of publicity. The Aquatic Center, but you see the two ugly things on the side, they finally came off, and the project looks like that now. If you ever go to London, it's very cheap, it's public now, and anyone can use it. Question about how these massive buildings that are built as an urban context get utilized as later on. Once they are finished, it's a massive investment to maintain, etc., and how do you cope up? These are critical aspects of building. I'm just running through them quickly to come to the main topic, but just a glimpse of what we do. There's some other views of this aquatic center. It's a nice. Another project like this, which I was involved in Egypt, which never got built because Egypt went into a revolution, but we were quite close to sampling, and mock-ups were done and everything. But architecture, what I'm trying to say is architecture is not really dependent on just design and fabrication and making, but it involves a lot further processes that are usually beyond your control, even as architects and urban planners, or politicians for that matter. This is one of the buildings I finished in Beijing last year. So basically it was an existing this is just opposite the Olympic site, 500 meters long building. The client had wanted us to close the facade. So we did the facade, and we tried to create a pattern. This is more of a parametric design, where there were about 3,600 pieces of glass, curved glass, the pink ones that you see. They were all in different sizes. We had to use parametric tools. This is one of the examples where parametricism is used as a design tool, just as a purely design tool, and then you optimize it, and all these glasses were made in, and this is what it came out. And all these glasses, the curved glasses, were made in Spain, shipped across. This is just a random picture out of my iPhone of our showroom in London. If you ever go there, please do visit. This is another couple of views of the showroom. We also do a lot of furniture, lampshades, taps, everything now. It's a wide range. We do projects based on what our clients usually come to us with. There is a similarity in the language, which we try and maintain in the firm. But I'm going to show you this one project in a little bit of more detail, which is something has been going on since 2004. The extreme right is being done by Isozaki. The center one, the curved building, is by Libeskin, and the twisted tower is ours. And I worked on this project for a few years. But what I wanted to show you is here, we are trying to use parametricism as a tool of optimization. The tower was just a model. The way it works, and I'll show you a quick video on this, is that it is the twist is an uneven twist, and the floor plates also vary. So there are two variating curves that bring this building, and all of these numbers that you see flying around are all generated through a script. And I'm going to just quickly show you a video, if I can make it work. So looking at this video, so these are the plotting of the floor plates. Now you plot those floor plates vertically. These are all scripted in Rhino, and each of these curves, floor plates, are derived from 4 curves at certain degrees, and they twist based on the curves that I had shown you earlier. And this twist continues. So first you generate the flow plates. It gives you the degree and the angle of rotation, which you don't have to worry about so much. Then it subdivides the glass panels. There are 2 layers of glazing in this tower. So you subdivide it into, we had a lot of to and fro movements between the glass contractor and us to optimize the glass and to kind of find the right, like economize the tower. It's one of the cheapest towers we are ever building, even during the hard recessions in Europe. And then the flow plates are developed from that. And you can see the overall circles that form those curves. And then these are straight columns, flow-to-flow straight columns, but when you see it on an overall perspective, you'll see them as inclined. Same goes with the other columns. The 2 niches are single glazing, whereas the rest is double glazing. But you see all these numbers flying around. They all come out as Excel sheets. We coordinate with the consultants. Even to an extent that we had to rationalize the chill beams because they're all different. They're all varying on different flows. You optimize it. You see how many typical flows. This is the first layer of internal facade, which is concealed for fire rating and stuff. And then this is the only concrete elements. And then you have the outer layer of the facade coming around. Oh, this is the single panel glazing. But you can see across how many numbers it's generating, and it's all controlled through basic rules. I'm showing this project because I'm going to step the game up a little bit in a few minutes when you talk about cities and to start talking about numbers. So the possibilities of having smaller rules, once set up, can give you a large variation, a large techniques, an easy manipulation can sort out the most effective problems. This is the internal corridor, and yet give you something quite different. This is the internal corridor between the first and the second. I'll show you some images. But the perspective and the reason why the tower is twisted is because there's an axis in Milan that comes right and hits the tower, and the tower picks that axis, and then it kind of disappears. You'll see it in a minute. It just kind of it's supposed to disappear into the sky, so you don't see the end of it. So this is one of the examples of using a tool like parametrics to effectively reduce cost, make it more efficient, and has got very little to do with design. This is the stage it is in, I think, 2 months ago when I visited Milan. It was something like that. And you can see the tower at the back, the Isosaki Tower, is already built. This is my current ongoing project. It's in Riyadh, and it's a metro station. Oops, sorry for the graphics. But this is what the interior is. So basically, there are 2 lines crossing over each other. One is a high speed, and on the bottom, there's the metro. And then you have a transfer level. This is the entrance lobby. So these are the projects which still has 2 answers, who am I? But this probably is something that I did for a very long time, and it started many, many years ago, before even smart cities and anything came into this scenario, because I was working in Bombay with Charles, and one fine day he had an idea that why don't we see that there's a problem coming, and I want to do a research, which I'll show in later half. But then it kept evolving, and I went to UK. There was a lot of discussion about biological models, a lot of discussion of how we have been building so far, what are the problems, why we are facing so much more problems than the West is, and so on and so forth. So I started this concept based on India first, but then as I go on, you learn that it kind of affects a general way we develop planning. So this is a particular thing that how to design cities over 10 million population. The fact is that Corbusier, Neymar, anybody who designed cities only designed for 6 million people. Chandigarh was designed for that. There'd never been a planning strategy for more. So what we have done is we have taken that 6 million model and we kind of repeated it and let it grow as mushroom growth, left, right, and center. And what we land up is utter chaos. But we still don't have a solution. So I said, this wasn't that you don't have to build one, but you're claiming to build 100 of them. So you're going to build 100 of chaotic cities. This is something that came out in the UN Habitat reports, that it was evident that 28 megacities with population of exceeding 8 million, and two-thirds of these will be in developing countries. This is in 2009. It's probably further up now. And then at that time, LSE was doing so I was part of the mega cities when they were doing it in Bombay, and LSE went around these 9 or 10 cities, and they did a graph of density. What occurred to me that when you look at the high populated cities of the world, they're a very unequal distribution of density. So they're very less effective on the overall platform. Somehow you have certainly high-rise towers, except for probably London and Berlin a little bit. But the rest of it is really these spiky points that are really high density, and the rest of the city is pretty much less dense. So how do you use land effectively? That was the question. Then I mean, you can do this, a quick Google search, and you try and link all the cities in terms of population density, and you land up with cities of India, all highlighted in yellow, like Titagarh, Baranagar, who we have never heard of, that exceed density more than Delhi. And no one is even talking about it, and we are talking about building 100 more cities to populate them. But the important fact is you have to find a solution that will actually help these cities first, because they are going unnoticed. And how do you solve the overall problem of India if 15 out of 30 dense cities in the world are located already in India? So this is one of the graphs for the Indian cities and what is the expected increase. It's just a mere detail, but you can see that there's going to be a really high rise in the density in urban sectors wherever we are. This is a very interesting graph. This is the graph based on density on one axis and petroleum consumption on the other axis. So you see the European cities, Hong Kong, Moscow, they're quite low, high in density, but uses very little petroleum. Whereas the American cities, because of their design, because of their spread, uses a very high petroleum consumption per capita. Which brings us to something like this. This is Beijing when I was there, and I think I was there for 20 days, and I hardly saw the sun 2 days. The pollution can go up to 800 per cubic meter of air, and the human consumption level should be below 200. Delhi is already 400-500. So, and if you live in Beijing all your life, in this pollution, you lose 15 years approximately of your life. So we are building. So now the planning strategies that has typically gone through all through the centuries, and I say since we've started planning. So you had Harvard City Beautiful Scheme that was more of a radial way, and which built Delhi, similar to London, Paris, Champs-Élysées, etc. And then you have a linear system which started when your rail networks were laid, and the city grew around the rail networks, like Bombay, Manhattan. And I call Brasilia as linear because its arrangement is linear. It's a grid city, but it's still very linear in terms of its arrangement. It has primary axis. The third one was a grid city, which was, well, from Mohenjo-Daro to Chandigarh and Mexico City, which is the largest grid city in the world. And what are the analysis? And these are some of the vast, on the top left is Algeria. Most of it you'll already recognize: Venice, Amsterdam, Paris, Barcelona, Hong Kong. So you see that they're all very unique in their character. And this is something we're trying to do in the workshop as well. We're trying to identify a character, and we're trying to build the city based on that character. They're very unique in their character. They work very differently. What is right or wrong is a secondary question. But first, to understand that cities cannot be multiplied 1 into 100 to make 100 cities. This is the work we were doing at Zaha Hadid at the time. We did a master plan for One North, Singapore. It was just a master planning axis, but it was a way to connect road networks in a very new pattern. These are some of the images. But what I understood from all these gatherings of all the ways cities have been planned so far is either you have a grid model where connectivity becomes a problem, or you have a mass rapid transport model where when you start laying the transport system, immediately the land around it starts getting denser, and nobody cares about the land on the sides. So it's a big problem because you cannot put the transport network to every corner. And if you do that, it makes it slower. So I said, okay, let's go back. Let's go back a few steps and see how nature deals with problems. So in a 1 cubic meter, you can have 1 million fishes, and they all move together. They have 100 the size of brain we do, but they never collide. they change directions much quicker than we do. So we were thinking that why can't cities do the same thing? Why can't cities be more adaptive? You always have places that grow and shrink, that get more popular, less popular, and it keeps happening all the time. But why do we have to make it so rigid where we have it driven by economics, where the density around the corridors are more? This is an experiment by Otto, and I want you to register the image on the right because it'll come in many different ways, this kind of patterning. He's connected all the nodes with straight threads. When he puts it into soap water, you see the minimum optimized path, the optimized path, not the minimum, the optimized path between all is not a straight line. So it's a key lesson, because when you look at it into different scales, like red blood cells, bone structures, and all these, they all have a very similar texture of optimization strategy. So I said, what are they doing that we are not doing? So right now, our current strategy is we have this linear network where you have to go to A, to B, to C, and every time you add another node, you have to increase the width of the road. So basically, if our houses are usually on the 10-meter roads to 6x8-meter roads, which are the service lanes, and every time you increase another house, you add another car on the 100-meter road, because they have to come all the way out onto the 100-meter and then connect back to the other end. So you are not designing, so we have not been designing, not you, to the adaptability of the basic thing that we know is that population is going to increase in cities. So I said, how do we do this? How does it work in a different way? What happens if you have a mesh logic? You have let's say a triangulated mesh. When you increase a node in a triangulated mesh, you don't need to increase the width. The number of ways to get to the other point from A to E increases. The moment you increase another node, it increases further. So you have more choices the moment you start increasing the city. So what's the basic difference? The basic difference is what we have been doing so far is what they call a Lindermeier system. It's an L system. It's a branching network. On the right is the development of growth of corals, which is a DLA, which is the diffuse limited aggregation system. So it adds in time, and it still maintains a connectivity. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos how I do it, provided I get to the right slide. So usually these are all scripted, just to generate a model. So the way it works is, let's say you have a point where you have a mass rapids transport leave you, drop you, and your growth logic starts with a certain amount of limitations, controls, and those limitations allow you to kind of start growing as a network and spreading wider and wider. And in fact, this is your first definition of endlessness, that it can grow endlessly as far as you want. But I do have a solution for the second definition too, which I'll show you in a minute. So this is the first video that grows. Now what we have is we have roads and we have nodes. So every node, every point that you see have different numbers of connectivity. So one can have 2 connectivity, 3 connectivity, 4 connectivity, 5 connectivity. You don't need to have what we had V1, V2, that every road is a 4-point intersection. You can have different, and depending on the connectivity, you lay the intensities. So basically, what you come up in the end is green, blue is the intensity of the node. Now, what you have to do is, this is just a representation. Now you see the node intensities defines the kind of density you're going to have around the node. Because the more popular the node, the more denser it's going to be. But it is spread quite throughout the city. Now, this is a way to transform those nodes into intersection logics. So basically, how do you take these nodes and how do you make the road intersections? It's based on rules, but you see how it works. It works that every point, it takes into account about 15 points around it, what are the intensities, and gives you a road intersection pattern. And the moment you start doing this on a larger scale, does it look very similar to something we have seen before, some of the images? So this was one of the slides that said that we already have a certain kind of systems that which are already there, can it be a plug-in into an existing system? Does it always have to be from a clean slate or not? And it can grow from different parts. It connects to existing roads, and it can grow further and further. So how do we do it? We have a lot of Rhino scripts, as you saw. We have a lot of Grasshopper scripts that have to be linked. You distribute connectivity. That's the diagram of the node. Then what you are left in the middle is spaces. Now, some of them are green, some of them are brown, some images of connectivity. What does that give you differently from a grid? In a grid, when you look down Manhattan, on the bottom right, you don't have a destination. All roads look the same. If there was no number in Manhattan, you wouldn't know where to go. But if you have what on the left, it is what similarly cities like London's and all, they grew up, is that you have destinations at every intersection. You know where you're going, you identify, you make connections, you understand the city better. It gives better opportunities for building to be designed. It creates different shapes, sizes. Not all of them are cubical block towers of Manhattan skyline, glass boxes. But the other side of urban planning is, this could be Dwarka, this could be anywhere in Ahmedabad, but this is actually China, and there's not a single soul. I'm sure some of you have heard of the coast towns. What has happened is, very simply, the land values are too high, because the developers buy the land on a bid, and they try and develop it, and they try and sell it. There's always a big property bubble. And the average income of not just Chinese, but even Indian population is not that high. So even Delhi is seeing a big property bubble, which I think I made this slide 4 years ago. The bubble was 2 years ago. This is where it all started many, many years ago in 2008 in Charles's office, and this is one of his research I was doing with him. What it says is very critical, that you always hear architects talking about that, oh, don't build too high, don't build too high. Why not? And this is one of the reasons, because if you take, according to the codes, the LIG units, which is 4.4 square meter per person, which is basically 25 square meters a family, if you go beyond 5 stories, you're not saving any land as a whole unless you're not giving them the amenities on a city level scale. If you want to go at a high luxury units, then you are okay to go up to 18 stories. Beyond that, you're hardly saving any land on a city level. Unless, again, you compromise on amenities, which is what you see in places like Delhi and other places that you have to give so much donations to get into, because there's not enough amenities for people. So they face the local problem of, how do we manage to get into a good school, because they're not enough, just simply not enough. So because we are basing our logics on FAR calculations, and one fine day the government decides to increase another floor of the locality, it doesn't understand the consequences that it's going to give to that society. This is an analysis of grids. It's one of my workshop teams are also going to do this, so don't cheat. I've already done this homework. But you see why Chandigarh is so off? It's got a completely off grid. Whereas the basic modules, the good grid cities of Barcelona was a 130 module. So this is a model of Belapur, which is a bit tweaked. Belapur housing was done by Correa a long time ago. But the way it works is, instead of having linear houses stacked side to side, it works, the common, when you build a house, a plotted development, you have to leave the front end and the back end, and you all know that. But what do you do with that land? That usually gets a hard paving, gets a driveway. But instead, if you work around a courtyard, and you make simple rules at the bottom level, the red, where you have to have solid walls, then you can grow this system. This has already been built, but this had a problem with traffic, because there was not much car interaction with the community. So then you start multiplying it. You multiply it in fours, and you leave one corner for access. You give your office, local scale offices, local scale nursing homes, and then you multiply it further with the road access. So basically you come in from the 10 meter, you go underground, you park, you have your nursing home and basic local facilities within the system. And what it does is it gives you a good view straight down through right to the very end. which makes the city much, much more safer than if you had a linear road and the houses on the side. So, what is good about the system? It is adaptable. It is adaptable to shape, so you can start making shapes in it. You have to limit the size of the overall boundary, which is 200 to 300, 200 maximum, I'd say. And then, how does it work on the street level? You have 2 cars growing, and you have a 10-meter wide with a pavement, hawkers, and then you move into the internal courtyard section. Now, just to sum it up, so in the epicenter, you have where the high-speed rail leaves you, you have a set of things that branch out, that gives you the network, the laying of the sewage, etc., and then you have a plotted development. Then in that plotted development, the city starts to grow. The city doesn't grow in a day. Let it grow. Once it starts growing, the amenities start to kick in. The larger it grows, you need bigger hospitals, bigger schools, then you start building the bigger ones. You don't build the bigger ones first. So that way, the government doesn't need to invest everything in one go. Right now, the problem is the government is trying to get more investments to invest everything in one go, but here you start bottom up. You start from small, you see what is required, you start plugging it in, and then you start growing. So you have city-level parks, you have city-level hospitals, city-level multinationals. And then finally, when you reach an optimum density, you start having corridors of retail. And then the major roads already take shape. So what you do is you change the road widths within the 10-meter range. You go smaller and larger depending on how popular it's getting. So what is today a 10-meter complete wide road can tomorrow change and grow narrower. So this is just a rough sketch of what it could be. But now, the connectivity on a larger scale. You want to connect, you want to loop back these endless cities. So you have to come up with a system that once it reaches a certain stage, it connects to another one, it kind of merges completely together. And what connects all these together is a high-speed rail network. So if you have to go from London to Paris and you take a flight, it's really long because you have to first go to the airport, wait for an hour, take a flight, go to Paris, get out of the airport, take a taxi. So it takes about approximately 5 hours. But if you go straight by the Eurostar, it takes 2 hours center to center. So why aren't we doing that? Why are we building so many expressways and not building these high-speed rail networks at the first go? This will save a lot of India's problems in the first. The problem with the radial city and satellite towns is not that the city itself, but it's the junction where it connects. And that's the connectivity we have the problem with. These are all the cities in the world. You name it, it's pointed. It's at its dot. Some cities would obviously have to be flight connected because of their distances. I'm sure, by the way, I'm just showing you a future. These are cities of over 1 million population. Now, can you start to read India more clearly now? You can almost read the map of India. But the rest of the world is all spread out in different dots. Look at Australia. There's so much space. Go there. So this is and I'm not talking fictionally. While I was doing the research, 2 years later, this was out. High-speed train networks in China, in America, in Europe. It's already laid plans. We don't have it yet. This is what I think India should look like in terms of high-speed rail stations with the current densities it has. This is what I think the world should look like in terms of high-speed connectivity. Why high-speed connectivity? Why this fragmentation? Because you look at India in 1947 and you look at 2014, and you see that we have so many more states. And it's not because we don't get along with each other or the politicians wants to split us out, because it's hard to manage. It's hard to manage these kind of populations. And how do we solve the problems to deal with it? You have the government, you have a planning permission. What you're missing is a research division. Then what you need to do is have regulatory bodies. And then the regulatory bodies are not supposed to be designing. What they're supposed to do is they're only supposed to regulate, because you do not have enough number of people per government official to make it work like the way Europe makes it work. So you have to do a bottom-up system in this, where people, developers, and cooperative societies are allowed to buy land. Currently, it's only on bid at large scale for developers. But in this case, you could own an 80 by 80 square meter land and start developing. You can be a small-scale developer. You can run your own nursing homes, as I had shown. So you have to start bottom up. So one of the things that Adrian Brown said, that owning a home should not be a dream propagated in banners and with real estate mercy, but rather a human right. And there's a lot of talk about sustainability, so I thought this was a good statement to it. Sustainability is a capacity to create, test, and maintain adaptive capability. That's what our bodies are made out of. That's what everything else is made out of. And I love this one. It's my last slide. Computers are incredibly fast, accurate, and stupid. Human beings are incredibly slow, inaccurate, and brilliant. But together, they make a very powerful, powerful force beyond imagination. So I'll finish it off there, and I'll take any questions if you have. No questions?
Thanks, Subharthi. I feel like I need to defend Melbourne as a result of your critique of grids. Melbourne CBD works quite well, in my opinion, as a citizen of that city. It has a formal, grid pattern, but it also has a laneway subsidiary that feeds into it. The laneways provide an informality in the city, which means that there's low-cost opportunities for artists and for bars and for, for those sort of human aspects to enter into the city. Until the 1990s, there was very little life in the city after 5 p.m, but a recession meant that the prices of real estate went down considerably in the CBD and allowed that sort of thing to happen. As a result, in the rest of Australia, they've been trying to create that sort of thing happening there. I'm just wondering whether, because India is already so developed, already has such big cities, whether you can work with the existing fabric a little bit more, rather than creating a new fabric which mimics things from, from rules rather than people.
Well, we've been trying a lot. In fact, I'm doing 2 projects in Melbourne, one in Latope Street and one in Collins Street. We were facing a big problem getting that truck into the tiny thing, the garbage truck, because we are doing a massive tower in 2 places. I think there are 100-something stories. Grids and subdivision of grids. They have been existent in cities. I can't say if they're right or wrong. Some places it works. Barcelona is a very good example where the grid works. But what makes it even further a better quality of a city is the internal courtyards of Barcelona. That when you have the blocks together and then you have... So it's not... When you look at cities, for me, I mean, everyone has a perspective, but when I look at cities, I don't see it as just traffic and buildings. I see it more similar to maybe what Europe was or maybe what organic growth was, but I try and feed in other modes of traffic system into it because they are really interesting spaces. You turn corners, you see surprise elements, unpredictability. That appeals to me in many ways. And what happens in the grid, and which I tried to explain in the mesh concept and the difference between an L system and a DLA. So, the little lanes you're talking about that are 6 to 8 meters where the trucks can't go into is where your access is. So the garbage truck actually has to go all around the main roads to access the little lanes. So every time you increase, so let's say we are building the tower and we are going to populate that little grid, you're going to have more and more traffic coming into it, and it's going to clog it. I know it, but...
My alternative suggestion,
yes,
if I may be so bold, would be to densify the grid out further. It's a grid pattern that works throughout the whole suburbia as well, but it's the suburbia that lacks the diversity, which means it makes it dependent on the CBD. If you could cluster the amenities further amongst the suburbia, it would possibly make centres where people can walk and maintain a walking distance within those places.
I think there are 2 points in this. One is the walkability on a city. That depends a lot on the grid size, because Chandigarh, if you've been there, it's completely not a walkable city. It's too far long, a grid, whereas most European cities are walkable cities because of the grid sizes. Manhattan is quite walkable. It's 200-meter grids. The second one was about amenities. Now, I mean, we did the calculations, and it's clear that if you have certain kinds of units, you have to provide amenities, unless you provide the amenities. And if it's not close by, within your neighborhood, what we try and do now is we select what we did to Canary Wharf. We just select a particular area, we get the investment in, and we develop it. And then the government has to take care of the amenities. And in places where populations are under control, Melbourne, it is possible to do it. But places like India, where you have no clue of how many people exactly live there, how do you cater to that amenity? It's a very tricky, because they are built on FAR. So it's a bit more complex of repeating the same. Maybe it works okay in Melbourne at the moment, but I'm not sure how it will work once the development comes up, or the whole new development we are doing, and everyone else is doing. It's not just our towers, there are multiple towers coming up there. So we'll have to wait and see and learn. So maybe you can tell us once you get back. Yes.
Subharthi, what about Mohenjo-daro?
Sorry?
Mohenjo-daro. That was an Indian city.
Mohenjo-daro? Yeah, I know. We started the grid city, didn't we? But it was, I think, the planning of having the toilets in those days in the front and completely be able to drain right onto the road and have the drain system was quite a genius thing. And that's why it's been valued and so much until today, because they had a system of planning, there's a system of great baths, of community spaces, similar to the Roman baths, where you go and dip down and have a community space to meet. I mean, right now our community spaces are limited to malls, and that too doesn't sell. So, I mean, if you ask the shopkeepers in the mall, it doesn't really sell. The street markets sell a lot, and you see the cheap markets sell a lot. But I think it was a very different time. There were no cars. Cars has made a rapid change, especially in American cities. The difference between European cities and American cities only came up because of cars, and the wide roads, and the wider the road, and the suburban spread. So what you see as a model that I show is neither suburbia, and it's neither a complete urban scenario. It's more like an suburbia scenario. It's semi-dense, low-rise, high-density model, but also equally spread. Whereas in suburbia, the problem is the high density of roads to development. But Mohenjo-daro was quite interesting. I really studied it.
I would like to know what makes you so obsessed with form. And why do you think that we need to develop a system that is applicable everywhere? Why can't we have individual approaches in every space? Why that technocrat vision of a city? And I don't know. And even the buildings you did are contradicting somewhat your vision of a city, and they also seem to emphasize mainly on form. And is architecture not more than merely form? Is it not also a social structure that we're building? And is that not like a challenge for the whole society rather than for architects alone? And do we not have to engage with people in order to arrive to a new city?
I think, I agree with your point that where do people fit in? And I think one of the diagrams of how to build the research team and how to feed is to say that if you want to develop an own neighborhood, I showed just a model of how that repeating elements can work. But if you want to develop an old, between a grid of 100 to 100, if someone wants to take the responsibility to develop their own neighborhood, they're free to do so in this kind of situation. I just showed an example model. That's one. The other thing about architecture and urbanism, and why the studio I'm conducting is called Growth and Form, is it's a very lovely book by Darcy Thompson. It's called On Growth and Form. It analyzes geometrically many, many natures, from seashells to corals to a lot of things, and they all work very differently. So yes, like the studio, what we're trying to do is have 5 or 6 different ways of developing these bottom-up systems. It's not just one. I just showed you an example of one. But what I'm trying to get at is the way we do it. Why do we see certain patterns in nature that have taken years and years, more than we have spent this time on the planet, to develop an intelligence that works so finely, even as the human brain and the synapses, that we are still exploring a way to reach that destination. So my question is, this might not be the last solution, but my answer is that what I'm trying to do is get closer to that kind of effective system that nature follows, so that we can utilize it and forget the grid for once and try and think beyond. The social aspects, of course, it's very different in every place. As you must be well aware by now, in India it works so differently from probably where you are, and you couldn't implement certain designs. The form of buildings, you have to understand that all of these buildings are not completely my imagination. I've done parts of it. When you work in an office of 400 people, there are a lot of ideas. They come together. It's not one or the other. There's no one genius. And all buildings are not done by Zaha Hadid in person, but it's done by Zaha Hadid Architects. So and that is how our cities work too. What we see as an end product, you've got people, you've got urban designers, you've got urban planners. This is a vision of me as a planner. But tomorrow, if we had to implement this, I don't think it's going to get implemented 100%. There's going to be feedbacks, there's going to be ways where it's going to be developed. So it's going to work together. And that is why when I showed you the graph, that it feeds from bottom as well and from the top. So where it reaches in the middle, it's like that film Memento. The last scene is the middle scene. So it reaches the middle part, which is the regulatory bodies. That's the only place all they have to do is not think, where everyone else has to think from both directions.
I have 2 questions. And that's actually, I want to know your opinion about 2, let's say, projects or concepts that are more or less in the pipeline. One is the way that the Indian government until now has been dealing with the cities on the industrial corridor between Delhi and Mumbai. How do you see that development and how they approach that? And the second one is not the endless city, but the maximum city, which is a concept of Romy Khosla, Delhi-based architect, who actually takes the limits of natural resources as a limitation, saying that the maximum amount of people living in a city should be about 1 million, and then you need a radius, if I'm correct, of about 30 kilometers around that city to be able to have the land, the rainfall, etc., to make it self-sustainable. Would you be able to comment on these 2 concepts or projects?
Yeah. I think the first one might be a bit politically incorrect, but I still have a shot at it. The corridor of Delhi-Bombay, which has been in plan for 5-6 years now, I think the problem is not the government. The problem is much deeper than we think it is. Cities all across the world, London, Delhi, corridors, Hong Kong, everything, is not being planned by urban planners. It's been planned by some equity investor trying to do a development. The government thinks it's a great sustainable model to get some money in, people will get jobs, and which is right. And so more people move into the city. So this theory, of course, government is part of it, but this is a very basic fundamental theory which doesn't constitute of any urban planners, designers, no one, which runs nations, worlds, countries. That has to change to do anything to Delhi-Bombay corridor. I mean, at the local level, you can say this is right or this is wrong and so on and so forth, and that argument will continue for years. But if the fundamentals of that model of investment doesn't change, and if we don't stop running the cities by numbers, only then can we start thinking of social aspects, comfortable living, giving people, I mean, one of the reasons why I started this was like, you know, everyone gets a space, everyone gets an open space at the basic ground level. It's so hard to find. I mean, people are moving out of London because, firstly, London is getting more expensive, and secondly, well, they have a good connectivity, thankfully. So you can reach, in 30 minutes, you can reach central London. In 2 hours, you can reach from Brighton, and it might take you 1 hour 45 minutes from Zone 5. So people are moving out. They're seeing the positives in living away. They have a larger place for family, kids to play around. So the basic social fundamental, you know, the growth of, you know, having a space. These things, you know, I mean, for me, that's a sustainable model, that you give comfort to people. And that's where I think Mr. Khosla's, I think he's also trying to say the same thing, but in a different way, that he's trying to increase the comfort level of the people, but he's trying to do it by limiting. Whereas I say, let's make it limitless. Because limiting cities of India to 1 million might be a challenging and might need a dictator.
Thank you, Subharthi, for this wonderful insight onto looking at future of our own directions of development on behalf of Faculty of Architecture, CEPT University. I thank you very much for this lecture and the workshop you're doing with the students.
It's been a pleasure, and I hope some of my students who are here, they should be working soon.